This is episode 6 of Persistence in Prayer. What is Catholic coaching? Today I am joined by special guest Katherine Johnson. Have you struggled with adjusting to the different seasons of prayer and parenting? Have you ever wondered if Catholic coaching might be for you? Katherine shares how she has learned to adjust her prayer during the various seasons of life and how both Catholic coaching and spiritual direction have played an integral role in deepening her intimacy with the Lord and bringing her an overall sense of peace. Before we jump into the recording with Katherine, I just want to say welcome to anyone new. My name is Kylie, and I am a mom, a wife, an educator, and an entrepreneur. I'm a professionally trained Catholic mindset coach with a mission to help overwhelmed Catholics find peace and purpose in the chaos so they can become saints. Having a deep and meaningful prayer life is not exclusive to those in religious life. You are called to holiness too. You will notice that there are some technical issues in the recording this week, but I promise you it is worth sticking around. Katherine is excellent, and fortunately, her audio piece sounds awesome. It's mine that's not so great. She really is worth listening to, and so with that, let's jump in. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Persistence in Prayer. I am so blessed to be joined by Katherine Johnson this week. Katherine is a wife of 8 years and a mother to 3 young children. She has a bachelor's in math and computer science, an MBA, and worked in IT as a project manager, systems analyst in a global high-tech company for 5 years before starting a family and staying at home with her children. She spent the last 6 years working from home part-time as a bookkeeper and is excited to. Hello and welcome. Before we jump in today, I just want to say welcome to anyone new. My name is Kylie, and I am a mom, a wife, an educator, and an entrepreneur. I am a professionally trained Catholic mindset coach with a mission to help overwhelmed Catholics find peace and purpose in the chaos so that they can become saints. Having a deep and meaningful prayer life is not exclusive to those in religious life. You are called to holiness too. You will notice in this episode that there were some technical issues in recording, but I promise you it is so worth sticking around. Katherine is excellent. Her audio sounds awesome, and she really is worth listening to. So with that, let's jump in. Now be embarking on the adventure of working as a Catholic mindset coach. I am so excited for you, Katherine. We're going to talk about Catholic coaching here in a little bit, but is there anything else you want to say to just introduce yourself to everyone?
Hey, that encapsulates it. I have lived a very all over the place kind of life. I also worked in advancement at a university. So I've done fundraising, I've done all the things. I feel like I've done all the things from all over the place. And now I'm going to coaching.
I love it. So I would love to know, because we're going to talk a little bit, or I want to hear your story, because we've talked about it before, about your transition in your prayer life from the different seasons of life. So what does a typical day in the life of Katherine Johnson look like right now, maybe compared to your IT days?
Yeah, I'd say like it's far less predictable now, because my oldest is 6, so my 3 kids are 6 and under. And when you're working and you don't have kids at home, when you're waking up, when you're getting in the car, when you're getting to work, that you're going to hopefully have a good night's sleep the whole time overnight. And yeah, my life was I would say like very routine, very predictable. It was very easy to get into a routine. Yeah, even being a newlywed, like it was still at the time, or before I was married, I was still working at that same high tech company. And I feel like it was just like my time was my own and I could, do with it what I will. I would spend a lot of time in prayer before I got married. I would, go to daily mass almost every day, pray liturgy the hours, do a holy hour, and I could do that because my time was my own. And now with 3 small kids and a house and a husband, it's very different. I don't know how much sleep I'm going to get at night, depending on if the kid's sick or if, someone just didn't sleep well. Even though I'm not working out of the home, I feel like my time isn't my own and it's not as predictable now. And so like transitioning into prayer life, like it's been hard for me since becoming a mom and not working full time outside the home. Like it's hard to get into a routine with prayer life because you just don't know what kind of the day is going to throw at you. So yeah, it's great. I love my life now. It just looks very different. It looks very, very different than it did before. Because,
Yeah.
I don't know if you've heard. Go ahead.
Oh, well, you just said, my time was my own and it's not my own. And that's one of the number one thoughts that I hear from people that I coach who are mothers. It's like, my life is so out of balance. My time is not my own. I'm ruled by my schedule. Like, I don't know how to fit me into my life.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is a really big struggle. And I feel like I'm only just starting to get a handle on it like in the last year. And my oldest is 6, so I feel like in the last year I've kind of been able to get into a better rhythm, or like knowing, how much is too much in terms of like giving, like when am I really depleted on my me time? I was going to say, I don't know if you've heard like the concept of the bells, your children are, the bells, the diapers, the cries, all the needs of your kids are like the bells that monks have, or sisters,
Oh.
um, and so it's like a different form of, like a call to prayer, right? Because the bells in the monastic life are when they get called to prayer, even if in the middle of doing something, they still have to leave it and go pray. And I've heard that from Lisa Canning. I know you know Lisa Canning.
Yeah.
Lisa Canning, but even before her, I heard it. I read it in an article, and so I feel like the bells in my life there are many, and you never know when they're going to come.
That's beautiful. I actually haven't heard that one. I haven't heard that from Lisa either. So that's really cool. I like that. And it's very true. Her life as a mother looks so different. And I think that's one of the things we have to remember is like in changing the diapers, that is our prayer life. Like
Yeah.
that is our offering. And I think I talked about that in one of my first podcast episodes too. It was like I was scrubbing the toilet bowl for my husband because he was sick and kids and everything else, and it's like this is my prayer right now.
Yeah. And it can be, I think one of the things that I've really worked on a lot in terms of mindset with prayer life is like that it's not supposed to look the same. When I was single, my prayer life did look different, and like intimacy with the Lord, is like the goal is still intimacy with the Lord, but the way that you get there might be different, and my personality, like I love solitude and quiet. And again, obviously you don't get that very much with 3 little kids. But like it was a big shift, and I've still been working on it. I've trying to figure out like, okay, I do need solitude and quiet, but I can't get as much as I could when I was single. So where can I fit it in? How can I fit it in? And like you said, like, how can I make the rest of my day a prayer, or how can I fit in prayer in the rest of the day in a way that maybe wasn't as natural when I was younger and my time was my own? So how do I fit it in now, but still recognizing that I have a need for the silence, so I still, I try pretty consistently to get to a holy hour once a week, because that is, like that regeneration time that I need. I try to have silent prayer during the, like once a day, but it's, sometimes I get it, sometimes I don't, but kind of my reset time is very much like that holy hour at the end of the week or the beginning of the week, to make sure that like that part of my prayer life is fed.
Yeah, I do a holy hour every week too, and that was tough for me to implement because I felt like I didn't have time. So I actually do mine in the middle of the night, and people think I'm crazy, but I don't feel guilty about not spending time with my children because they're sleeping. I don't, I don't have to feel guilty about it. And yeah, sometimes I'm tired, but I'm like so filled with grace the day after that it's totally worth it for me. I don't think I could go back to not having that holy hour every week just because I thoroughly enjoy it. And I know it's not going to be interrupted. If you go to a holy hour in the middle of the day, like there's other people in there, there's still movement in and out, but no one else is coming in at 3 a.m.
Yeah,
I am there by myself.
I haven't been brave enough to do 3 a.m. I haven't gotten there yet. I still do my during the day, but yeah, no, yes, yeah, it is very peaceful.
With my work schedule, it isn't possible at this season of life. And I love that you talked about how everybody's journey is different because for me, I feel like my prayer life, I'm much like you. I need the solitude and I need the quiet, but I feel like my prayer life has deepened since I've had children
Mm,
because I was so sick during my pregnancies and I've
mm,
had a lot of like chronic illness since that it has forced me to slow down because I am someone that is like, I'm going to fill every second of every day with good things, like helpful for other people, but I didn't make time for my prayer life. The first thing to go was always sleep. The second thing to go was my prayer time to try to get all the things done. As a teacher, it was like there was always grading, there was always parents to email, there was always students to help. Like everybody else came first.
yeah.
And it
Yeah.
took me a long time to realize that my soul has to come before everybody else because if my soul is not on the right trajectory, then I am not helping all those other people in the way that, the Lord is asking me to serve them.
Yeah. You have to go first, and it's like if it's the backbone of your life, like prayer is the backbone, the bedrock of your life. And you're just going to fall apart if, you're just going to be drained, because I've been there too. I've been there
Mhm.
where, like, just like you said, like I've just worked myself and gave to a fault, and I too don't have easy pregnancies. At least the first half in particular, I'm just very, very sick and very, very tired, but also in those moments to like, I think what I've learned also, is like to give yourself grace, in your prayer life where like know when to push yourself, but know when to give yourself grace, like I said, like when I first had my first baby, she was a hard baby. She just cried a lot and wouldn't take a bottle. So she's just with me all the time and she would cry all the time. So I didn't want to take her into the adoration chapel, with the screaming baby. Um, but it was like a huge transition of like how do I go from this, like I'm able to go to daily mass all the time and not worry about a screaming baby with me, and take the time in the chapel and take the time every day, and then have that shift of just like recognizing that there are certain limitations now that I have on me, again with regards to like I don't want to take a screaming baby into an adoration chapel, you know and giving myself the grace of like, okay, the Lord called me to this life. He gave me this child. And that means that for a season, maybe I can't go, and or maybe maybe I figure out how to, and I just let her scream with dad for an hour, one or the other. Which I did too. Sometimes she did that.
Uh,
Sometimes my heart couldn't take it up a bunch, but just giving yourself the grace to know that like a prayer life can be dynamic. It needs to be, because our relationship with the Lord isn't stagnant and it's dynamic. And so that, that means that our prayer life needs to be dynamic too, and to ebb and flow with the different seasons.
Amen. Yeah. So one of the things you mentioned earlier, you said that this past year has kind of been a shift in your prayer life. Is that because your kids have gotten older, or what do you think has caused that shift?
There's been a few things. I think some of it's my kids are older, some of it's, I'm a mom 3 times over now. So I kind of know how to like, I know the kind of developmental stages. I know, oh, this clinginess isn't going to last forever, or, oh, they're going to survive with a babysitter. With my first, she like never went to a babysitter because she was a hard baby. And also I don't know, I was just, I was a little bit more of a worried mom. So I think I've just relaxed a lot is one of the things. Like I said, I've given myself that grace more. Um, and like I think I've asked the Lord more, like what he wants my prayer life to look like with him, rather than just me dictating like, um, it has to look this way. I have to be going to daily mass. I have to be having a holy hour once a week. I have to be having 45 minutes of silent prayer a day. Um, and just kind of trying to discern with him, like what and when. I would also say like for sure coaching has been a part of it. And I don't want to sound like I have it all figured out and it's perfect, because it's really not.
Mhm.
But what I've noticed that I've done recently since like being introduced to coaching is when I notice that I'm struggling in my prayer life, I like interrogate what that's like, what the emotion is behind it, why it's there, what the block is, whereas before I might have just like slacked off on my prayer life until it was painful and then realized, okay, I need to come back, and now it's kind of like when I realize that I have like an avoidance, or I'm just not as like excited to be with the Lord or whatever. Like I feel like I can catch it if that's the right term, but I can kind of catch it earlier, where it's just like, okay, I noticed that the disposition of my heart has changed. Like, what's going on? What am I thinking that's causing my heart and my emotions to shift, when I approach the Lord? And most of the time, it always comes down to like some lie that I have in my mind about who God is, or some like, super high standard that I have of myself. And that creeps into, expectations of my prayer life and what it should look like. Or, it creates this image of who I think God is when I'm praying. Like I just recently, I had I realized that the thought I was having about my prayer is, I don't know if God values my time, or like, I don't think God values my time. And that's why I was avoiding prayer, because it was almost, but the image that I had in my mind related to that thought was, we all do this, but like when you're busy with something and your kid comes up and just wants to talk to you, and you're like, right? And we're all guilty of this, we're not giving them our full attention, and we're just kind of appeasing them because we want them to know we're listening, but we're really busy doing something else. And I realized that I had that image of God in my mind, and I felt like not valued, And so when I like recognized that I had that image, I was like, wow, like that's absolutely a lie. Like it's absolutely a lie from the devil, because that's not the way the Lord works. And, he isn't finite like I am as a human, So anyway, it's just an example of like, I feel like coaching and the skills that I have to self-coach now, have enabled me to kind of catch the laziness that I have in my prayer life earlier, and help me to get to the root of it so that I can, overcome it, work through it, ask the Lord to transform it sooner.
Yeah, absolutely. I can relate to a lot of that, like the lifetime manual. I remember when I first was introduced to coaching, and they're like, "Oh, do you have a manual for like how you think your day should go?" Oh yeah, not just my prayer life, but everything.
Yes.
I like to think that I'm a go with the flow type of person. Like I'm a teacher. I have to be adaptable. I adapt all the time. But when it comes to my personal day, or like I plan something and all of a sudden it's like, oh, your kid's sick and this is supposed to be your day to work on your fun stuff.
Yes.
It's like, oh, now I'm angry and I'm frustrated. And the same happens in my prayer routines too.
Yeah.
Uh, I know we were on vacation, and I get up at 4:30 every day, and that's my mental prayer time in the morning. And again, that has shifted with the seasons. So this is like, since I'm not coaching volleyball anymore, I've just made this a priority that every day I'm going to do this. And on vacation, there was one day I overslept, and I just remember feeling so guilty. And I had to coach myself through that, like, okay, this is ridiculous.
Yeah.
The Lord is not upset with you that you slept in, and it ended up taking us, several more hours to get back home than we thought we would. We spent, extra hours on the plane and all these things. It was like, maybe the Lord knew this is the day that you're going to have. You need that extra sleep, and it was okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I
Yeah.
think.
I'm not up there keeping score, right?
Yeah,
Like
absolutely.
I'm the one that has the checklist of like, okay, I've had like a streak of 10 days, right? Or whatever. Like he's not up there checking the, Anyway.
He's like, oh my gosh, I'm so happy to see you.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
thank you for spending time with me.
Yeah, I had a coach actually recently, because I went to be coached on my prayer life.
Mhm.
And and she recently actually gave me a really good analogy, and I really loved it. And she was talking about, she's like, okay, think of it like when you're with because I was saying, I just want to have like such like a good, good conversation with the Lord every day. And she said, well, you're a mom of little kids, and think about you and your husband. Like, do you guys have really great, deep conversations every day? And I was like, no. She's like, but you have like check-ins, right? Like you just kind of check in with each other, right? And I said, yeah. And she said, but you like make sure probably, somewhat regular that you have the deeper check-ins, the date night, even if it's just, a extended conversation without the kids when they go to bed. I said, oh yeah, we for sure do that. And she said, well, like, could that be like an analogy to your relationship with the Lord, right? Where you're like, have these check-ins, and then you have the deeper times with him. Because I had a manual, right? I had this expectation of myself that every day my prayer needed to be like an hour of really deep, intense, like conversation with him, and it needed to be meaningful and awesome and blah, blah, blah. And when she framed it that way, I was like, okay, like that's, I don't feel guilty when I talk to my husband, like I just, maybe I have, a few minutes here and there to check in with him. throughout the day. And then maybe we have a longer conversation at night or whatever. I don't feel guilty about that with him because I know that we're in good relationship, and I know that that deeper time is going to come. But it was an interesting shift in my mind of just like with the Lord, like it could look the same, as well for the season.
Yeah, absolutely. That reminds me too of how many times in prayer we try to show up and make something happen. Like we want to feel something, so like we try to make it happen when really we can't do anything. Like we can show up, but the Lord has to make it happen. And like, the more we try to force it, it's not going to go where we think it's going to go.
Or the reminder that prayer is not about you, right? Like silent prayer is not about you. I think it's so easy for us to go to prayer and to silent prayer and be like, I want an answer on these things, or I'm feeling bad. I want to feel better, Jesus, or I need to be with you. Like it's so easy to go in with an agenda, and I always have to remind myself of like, this is not about you, Catherine. Like, this is not about you. And then you're not here for you. Like you're here for Jesus, drop your agenda, drop your whatever you have, planned, whatever you're going to talk about, with the Lord, like let him just love you, and like silent prayer is not about you. So
Yes. And that is why I do my prayer time in the morning. Like that has been a game changer for me, just because like your mind isn't so many different places, starting fresh, just waking up, and it's kind of beautiful.
yeah, it's a blank slate.
Yes, absolutely. So one of the things that I want listeners to know, especially moms, is that they can both work and have deep, meaningful prayer lives. So if you had to summarize for someone like your best advice to stay persistent in prayer, what would it be?
What keeps coming to mind is just give yourself grace, and don't and give yourself grace because the Lord gives you grace. Like don't be harder on yourself than God is. That's actually something that like a spiritual director is I've brought to him before, where I'm like, I judge myself harsher than God judges me. And that's a form of pride. We can talk about that all day long, but yeah, just to remember that God loves you, and he wants to spend time with you because he loves you, and not because there's some spiritual scorecard in heaven. And then he understands, what you're going through in your life, that he sees it and he sees you, and he's not up there, like demanding more from you in an unreasonable way. Like you'll be convicted if you're being slothful and you're being lazy in your prayer life. That's the thing that can happen. The Lord can convict you in a gentle way, in a loving, gentle way, and you'll know. But it's not out of like guilt and obligation and the shoulds, as we say, like I should, right? I should do XYZ. Like the Lord loves you, and he gives you a lot of grace and wants you to give that same grace to yourself. I just feel like that's what I probably needed to hear 6 years ago. But that's also because, my personality, I just can be really hard on myself. My personality, I can be really, really hard on myself. So, yeah, hopefully that helps somebody, but.
Amen. I think it's something that we know, right? Like you hear, give yourself grace, but what does that, I mean, I think you have to talk about what does that actually look like to give yourself grace? Just like you said, don't be harder on yourself than the Lord is on you. The Lord is loving and kind and forgiving, and um, recognize what season of life you are in. But there is a balance between, am I being lazy, or is this the season of life that I'm in? And I think that that's really where we need other people. We have so many blind spots that we cannot see. That is why the Lord built us in community, not to be here alone, but to be surrounded by other people who are journeying on that same path to union with him. And so that's where I think coaching is so essential, and also spiritual direction, which I would love to talk about the differences a little bit with you if you don't mind. But go ahead, and what else were you going to say?
Oh, I was going to say there's a discernment, there's discernment involved. And that discernment, of course, is easier with, the help of a good spiritual director, because you get out of your own head. Like that's the biggest thing, is you get out of your own head. But what I was going to say is like, it's virtue, right? Like a healthy, good prayer life is the pursuit of virtue, and virtue, like vice is on either extreme, right? And so of course, like it's going to be a dance and it's going to be a balance, because virtue is that narrow path, and so it's very easy to like err on the side of overzealous to the point of, the point of sin. And then it's also easy to err on the side of laziness, and so sometimes we can get caught up in that, oh my gosh, but it's so hard to be right in the middle. And it is, it is hard to figure out how to, walk the narrow path. But yeah, I love what you said about it's much easier if you're not trying to do it by yourself in your own head all the time.
Absolutely. Like, community is so essential. How would you say, like, the difference between having someone coach you in your prayer life? Ironically, I had taken a long break from coaching because I am a full-time teacher and I was a head volleyball coach. And so when I finished up my training through Metanoia Catholic to become a coach, I had to take a break from it. I utilized a lot of the tools and things in my job, but I wasn't coaching one-on-one. And when I jumped back into it and I coached at Metanoia Catholic's Academy, you were one of the first people that I coached.
Oh, really?
Yes. So I had taken this long break and I was like, okay, I miss it. I want to get back into it. I know that this is the path that the Lord is calling me to. I, had spent a lot of time in discernment. I had gone on a silent retreat and I just knew this, like, this is it. The Lord is calling you to this. It's time to leave, set teaching aside, because this is the path that I want you to travel on. And when I got on my call, you were one of the first people I coached.
It's so funny. That is really funny. And then we figured out, do you remember when we were talking, we figured out that another time when I came to get coached on my prayer life, it was supposed to be you, but because
Yes.
of the trip you were on, it wasn't you.
Yes. Yes.
So
And it's ironic too, because we just have so many things in common. And this is like those connections where when you're in a good community, the Lord brings you the people that you need. Like the fact that we're both math majors, I think is ironic.
because how many are there, right? Like how many
Yes.
people that were in a math profession now want to be coaches? Like, I don't know, maybe there's more than I think, but I feel like that's kind of uncommon.
Yes.
So, yeah, no, that's awesome. That's really funny. I didn't realize that. And what's funny is when you coached me on, like, what I brought to coaching was about becoming a coach.
Uh,
And then the second time that you're supposed to coach me that ended up not being you was on my prayer life.
yes.
Just funny.
Yeah.
Funny.
Perfect. And now you are going to be a coach.
Yes, on my way. I'm coaching some people for free because I just finished up like the beginnings of Metanoia's training. But yeah, I'm in the certification program and I will be a full-fledged coach in October. So I'm excited for that.
And I'm actually going to go through certification with you. So I have done Purgative Way, which was Metanoia's first training, and now they've extended it to certification, which they did not have when I was trained. So I'm going to go back through it again, because I think that, number one, the community is incredible, but as coaches, you have to constantly put yourself out there and be vulnerable to learning and growing and getting coached yourself, which is so huge. How would you describe coaching versus spiritual direction? What's the difference? Because you've had both, like you have both.
Yeah. I get coached and I have a spiritual director. I meet with him once a month, roughly once a month. I think coaching is very action oriented. So both, I would say, like both in both, it's very important to pay attention to the Lord and how the Lord is speaking. That's kind of just our life in general, right? It's important to listen to the Lord and what he's asking you to do. But I would say with coaching and what I've experienced with coaching is it's very action oriented, very like, okay, we have a goal that we're going towards and we have some sort of obstacle to that goal. How are we, like, what do we do to remove the obstacle? So like I mentioned with my prayer life, like I realized that there was this thought that I had that God didn't value my time. And then that associated with that was this image. And so with coaching, it's like correcting that, bringing that thought and that image through reason, and then asking the Lord into that while you're bringing it through reason and asking him to give you, the insight, inspiration, the words, whatever he wants to speak to you in that moment. Right. So you can identify like what's coming from the Lord and what's not coming from the Lord. So in my experience, it's been very like action oriented, getting over an obstacle, headed towards a goal, whereas spiritual direction has been more like slow down, Catherine. It's more focused on how to slow down and how to rest and how to like recognize the Lord in the rest, and more on how to receive from him. Whereas coaching is like how to do, like what do you do, right? What are you doing actively? Even if it's not, even if it's just all you're doing is thinking, right? The doing can be thinking. But where spiritual direction has been like learning how to rest in the Lord, how to rest, in prayer, how to recognize the movements of God in prayer. And there is some overlap, I mean, we've talked about that. We're like, of course there's overlap because the Lord's involved in both, and we're integrated human beings, so our minds, our souls, all of that is, our bodies are all integrated. So there's going to be some overlap, but that's what I would say is I also feel like coaching is more like in my, and this is maybe a bad word to use, but like in my control, meaning like I'm looking for the thought. I'm asking the Lord to show me what the thought is to work on. I'm kind of initiating in coaching, whereas I feel like in spiritual direction, it's more like, how is the Lord initiating? That's been my experience. I don't know if you can relate to that, or I know you're going through a spiritual director formation, so way more than I do, but
Yeah. Well, it is interesting, in the orientation to spiritual direction, kind of the way that they lined it up, I was like, oh my gosh, it fits a lot with coaching, which was not my experience with my spiritual directors. But I do think there are substantial differences. I know there are kind of 4 pillars that they talk about in faith formation. I always forget the 4th one, but there's human, there's spiritual, there's intellectual. I never remember the 4th one, but they are all overlapping, right? Like there's your intellectual, but I think the spiritual life is more, that's like heart centered and heart oriented. It needs to be informed by the intellectual. So there's that overlap. And then, like you said, the action oriented from coaching, that's like the human formation of informing the intellect and strengthening the will. And there are more tangible results. Whereas spiritual direction, like those graces, you can't see them, right? Like the Lord is working, that God is there, but you don't see those results as tangibly as through coaching. It's like, okay, you can visibly see a difference in someone's body language from when you start a session to the end of a session. Like you can see that weight lifted. You can see like their action step that they take from one week to the next. Things are getting done.
yeah. Yeah.
And with the Lord, you don't always see that. Everything is on his timing. And so I think that that's kind of the distinguishing difference that I would say.
Yeah. And I would also say, with like, I don't go into spiritual direction with a particular goal in mind.
Right.
I just go into spiritual direction and talk to him about how I've been relating with the Lord lately, what my prayer life's been like, how he and I have been moving together. Whereas with coaching, like I'm always coming in with a goal or with a problem that I'm trying to solve, right? Like I don't go to spiritual direction. I'm like, Father, I have this problem. Like, can you fix it? So I'd say that's also a differentiating factor. There's something else that came to mind, and now I don't remember what it was. Oh, that like what I have found though, because with my current spiritual director, I've been with him for about a year and a half. And I found that like, as I've been able to coach myself and I've been coached, I bring far less problems to spiritual direction, meaning like, I don't go to him and like ask him, I can't figure out why I can't pray every day. I can figure that out on my own now, like with coaching. And sometimes I do still bring that, I definitely mention it. If I'm struggling with prayer, I'll mention to him that I'm struggling with prayer. But I also have been able to identify more myself, like I'm struggling with prayer and here's why, so I think there's definitely been like huge benefits in my spiritual direction where I've been able to really focus on like the movements of the Lord rather than all of these other peripheral things, like lies that I believe about God and all this other stuff, whereas the better formed I've been with coaching. It's enabled me to really like focus and hone in spiritual direction on my spiritual life and all these other peripheral things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think like the movements of the spirit and spiritual direction. I was just thinking back over people that I've coached, and I love coaching people on prayer life, which there is like it's still distinguishing because I don't want to go into spiritual direction because that's not where like the coaching direction is. But you'll talk about a problem that's coming up, and I had one client, and she realized in her prayer life she was still had her morning routine, she was still getting up, but she had changed this one subtle thing, and when she went back to it, it like transformed everything else that had kind of like gotten her off balance in her life, which I thought was really fascinating. I had another mom come to me, and she said, I just feel like my whole life needs an overhaul, but I need to start with my prayer habits. But the root of the coaching was she had this thought that like I should already have this all figured out. I shouldn't need reminders to pray. Like I'm this age and I shouldn't need this. And so it was just all of that stuff of getting stuck in your head, that when you're in all of those thoughts, it's hard to lift your heart to the Lord because you're in your head and not in your heart. So
Yeah.
I think that coaching has really helped with that. And in my own life, someone asked me, how has coaching changed your prayer life? We talked about manuals. One of the things that it has really opened me up to is that, in my aspiration to be a saint, that I don't have to fit in the box of all the other saints. Like,
Mm-hmm.
yes, I'm gonna follow, like, we know certain things like Saint Teresa of Avila, Saint John of the Cross. We know that we need prayer, we know that we need reflection, and there are things to implement in our day. But my life as a mom and in my unique journey, my path is not going to look like theirs, and that is okay.
Yeah. And God doesn't want it to. I think that's what's even important to like emphasize is like God doesn't want your journey to look like everybody else's. He wants the end goal to be the same. He wants you in heaven, right? He wants you to pursue holiness, but like we have a very creative God, and I don't think I think I think the reason why there are so many people with so much variety in this world is because he loves that variety. And there with a variety of people comes a variety of walks, and everyone's going to have a unique life, but it can be such a huge temptation to want to like or comparison, right? Even to compare ourselves to the saints, and to be like, well, I don't have the stigmata, and I'm not, like Padre Pio, and I'm not, levitating, and I'm not
Yes.
locating. Like, I guess I'm not good enough, Lord doesn't love us generically. He loves us very individually. And with that, like our walk is going to be very individual and very unique. But that it's because of that, it's so important have people that can mirror things back to you. I think one of the things that you were saying about, having people in your life and also like focusing on your mind, like the coaches that I've had or the times that I've been coached, like Lisa Kading was my coach, like consistently for like 6 months. And other than that, I've just kind of I've had coaching here and there. But like coaches show you your mind. And like, similarly, my spiritual director, like there have been instances of the Lord's grace that I have been so blind to that he was able to be like, oh, like I see God working here. And I'm like, really? Because I don't, and he's like, well, here, da, 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 da. And I'm like, wow, actually, you're really right. Or I had like what seemed like a very insignificant experience. And I told him, I said, I had this little experience. And like, I feel like there was this huge shift in my interior life, but it seemed like such a small, insignificant thing. And I was like talking to him about it, and he recalled like, oh, that reminds me of Saint Therese. Like when Saint Therese had, for those that, are familiar with her, like Christmas, she had a Christmas day, like a shift and it was very small and subtle to everyone else. But to her, it was this, huge shift. And I hadn't even thought of that, and so it was just really beautiful to like have him be able to mirror, things back to me, or to say to me, like, actually, I think that is huge evidence of the Lord's grace, even if it seems small, or, even for him to be like, oh, look, like I'm looking back on like the notes from when you first started coming, a year and a half ago, and like, look at where you were, yeah. I think the other thing too, to talk about spiritual direction is like that, those are very long-term relationships usually, because our spiritual life never ends, until we die. Whereas again, with coaching, like we're pursuing a specific goal. And once we reach that goal, like you can continue with a new goal with the same coach, but there's always kind of that goal in mind. Whereas with a spiritual director, it's just kind of this like long journey together.
Yeah. And I think with coaching too, like, well, two things. Number one, a good coach holds the space. Just hearing you talk, like a good coach is going to hold the space for you so that you can process and you can see that mirror back of what all of your thoughts are so that you can come to your own conclusions and you learn how to solve your own problems. Because ultimately, no one else can tell you what to do. People can give you advice all day. Nothing makes me more crazy than the 200 long like responses on a Facebook post of someone asking for advice of what to do with their life. I don't know if they really think they're going to get a good answer that they can follow, because all they're going to get is confusion of 200 other people's opinions, when what they really need is someone to help them figure out what's already in here.
Yes.
And if that is aligned with what the Lord is telling them. So a good coach is going to hold the space.
I remember when you coached me, you were very good at holding the space. I remember you being very good at holding the space and being very good at helping me find my own. You were just a very good mirror. And I remember I would say something and then you mirror back to me and I'm like, wow, that sounds ridiculous coming out of your mouth. But like, I know that's what I just said.
That's so true. Okay, I remember. The second thing was, as a coach, it's kind of like parenting. Our job is to get you to a point where you are self-sufficient. We're always going to be there if you need to come back to us. We're going to be there to support you. We're going to be there to help hold you accountable. But ultimately, we want to meet with you for as long as you need us until you can do it on your own. Yeah. Like, yeah, you still need those check-ins. I mean, you can probably test this too. Like, I don't need coached as often because I know how to self-coach. That doesn't mean that I don't need coach. I still very much need coach. There are days when I cannot get out of my own head and all the journaling in the world is not helping. I need someone else. Yep. But I don't need them as often. And in those like smaller instances, I'm able to self-coach. Usually mentally, much more like if it's really bad, I got to write it out. I need to do my journal, those kinds of things. But that's the goal of a coach, is to get you to the point where you can manage that mindset and keep forging ahead. And
that's what I love about coaching, is that like we're like essentially we're trying to like not have a job, right? Yes. Like, but I kind of like that, because it's like I don't want someone, like I want to help someone help themselves, so that they can be a vibrant, thriving human being on their own. And then of course you need other people always, but like, they feel like confident that they can like tackle things that life throws their way. And okay, maybe something bigger got thrown your way and you need to talk to somebody about it now, but that's one of the things I love most about coaching, I think, is that like just what you said, it's like the teaching others how to self-coach so that they can do that for themselves. Because we can't be with them 24/7, you know, yeah. Like there's going to be things thrown at you the rest of your life. And the better you are at knowing how to manage your mind, the more you're going to be able to receive the graces that God has for you in all of those instances that get thrown at you,
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So as we wrap up here, you led right into it. My last question was going to be, what has the shift in feeling been from before coaching to after coaching? So one of the things you said was confidence.
Yeah, just like you mean in general, or specifically about prayer life, or
just in general, like, because I think even though I love coaching people in their prayer life, the things that they bring to me are definitely not always about prayer. There are so many other things that inhabit your prayer life that you have to sort through. You can't just push them off to the side and expect your prayer life to get better. You have to deal with whatever is in front of you at that time. Yeah. So I coached someone the other day on business. It's just, it's what does the Lord have for you to work through right then?
Yeah. So your question was, what was the biggest shift?
Yeah, like what kind of shifts and feelings do you have in terms of more confidence, more peaceful, better as a mother? I know I feel a lot more calm in my motherhood. I don't get as anxious.
Yeah. I think one of the biggest things was I am not a victim to my thoughts. And I'm not a victim to my emotions. Those were two of the big things when I first went through my first coaching experience, because I felt like I had so many thoughts and all these thoughts were coming to my brain and I just couldn't do anything about them. And and they were just wreaking havoc on me. And it was something I had to endure and something that I couldn't, I had no part in, like no agency to change.
Mhm.
So I think for me, there was a lot of empowerment involved, and with that confidence, because I realized that the Lord, like I realized more like the intellect and the will that the Lord gave me to choose my thoughts, to first like figure them out, and then once I figured them out, to choose different ones. I just felt like I had a lot more, like that the Lord gives us a lot of power in our own lives by his grace. It's not like I'm not trying to make myself, more powerful than I am, but like the Lord allows us, right, to have these faculties of intellect and will so that we can, make smart choices and we can think new thoughts. So that was really huge for me. Not feeling like a victim anymore, not feeling like a victim to even a victim to circumstances, because so often we can, especially like in motherhood, right? You can just so often, it's very easy to feel like a victim to your circumstances. Well, the baby woke up at 4 a.m., so I'm just going to be tired and crabby today, And like, yes, there's a certain element of course, it's harder to be happy when you have less sleep. Okay. I would also argue that that's a thought, but anyway, just realizing that like my circumstances don't dictate my life. Like, that even when there's things outside of my control, like my children's sleep schedules or like my children's, how often they get sick or all of those things, that like, I still have a certain amount of choice well, no, I don't, I do have a full choice over what I think. Right. And that those thoughts lead to the feelings, which lead to the actions. That was huge for me. And then with that, since I could choose my thoughts and I wasn't a victim to my thoughts, that I wasn't a victim to my emotions anymore. So often I felt like, oh my gosh, I'm just having all these feelings are just happening to me, to the point that's true, because like feelings can happen very quickly, but like, and I know you've heard it in our coach training, but it's like and I don't know perfectly, but it's something like the initial emotion lasts 90 seconds. And if it lasts longer than that, it's because you're choosing a thought in your head. It's because you're choosing to make that emotion persist because of something you're thinking. And so when I learned that, it just made me realize again, like how much control I had, like the Lord has granted us to have, that we're not meant to just, wallow in these difficult emotions or whatever. Like the Lord does allow us to have those emotions, to show us something. Like if you're getting angry, like, of course, be aware of the thoughts that you're having, but then like ask the Lord, okay, why is this happening? What are you trying to tell me about myself? Like, I feel like I have a much healthier, I'm still on the journey, very much on the journey, but I have a much healthier relationship with my emotions now, I feel like, than I did before. And I'm still on the journey, but I feel like I'm not afraid of them. I used to be kind of afraid of them, or I used to feel like a victim to them. And now I feel like much more, I understand why the Lord gave us emotions more, and I'm able to see them more as a gift. I love what like I think Matt has said it, maybe it was Matt or Aaron, Ingold, who are the founders of Metanoia, at some point said something along the lines of like, when an emotion comes up, it's like the Lord knocking on the door of that part of your heart and of that emotion, asking to come in, especially when it's the uncomfortable emotions, and you just like don't want to go there. And I remember them saying that, and I loved that, as opposed to like feeling afraid of that emotion, or like not wanting to go there, not wanting like the icky feeling that might come with that emotion, whatever emotion. I really love that. So I feel like that's been a huge shift. I think with that, there's just a lot more peace. Like you were saying, when you don't feel like a victim to your thoughts, to your emotions, to your circumstances anymore, there's just a certain amount of peace to that. And I feel like the intimacy that I have with the Lord now as a result of coaching and self-coaching, like that is also the source of peace, because like I've been able to identify so many of the lies that the devil has tried to tell me about the Lord. And I've been able to drop so many of those. And I've been able to, see him more clearly. I feel like I'm still a far way off because I'm a sinful, finite human being, but just the amount of like scales, that haven't been able to fall from my eyes. I feel like my trust in the Lord is so much deeper than it used to be. And with that, the peace that comes with that is huge.
I think for those of us who like to be in control, like this was such a good reminder through coaching that you always have a choice. So you do have control of some aspect. Like there are a lot of things outside of our locus of control, but you always have some sort of control. That doesn't mean that the choice is easy, or like if you're truly discerning and following what the Lord wants you to do, that doesn't make the choice easy, but it is a choice. And there's freedom in that choice.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, there's that fine line between like, you have control, but don't abuse it. Like, and I always remember that what is in your power is because the Lord has allowed that to be in your power,
Everything is a gift.
Yes, yes, yes.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This was fun. I hope that we can have you back again at some point. And do you have any last words of wisdom?
Go get coached. If you have no idea what it is, sign up for Discovery Call with Kylie and she'll show you.
Yes, you're missing out if you don't get coached. I know I was so scared. I shouldn't say scared, but just like it's kind of intimidating the first time you ever get coached if you have no idea what you're walking into. And so just it's freeing. It's not scary. It's just an opportunity to open up and see what's actually already in your mind.
I would also say, maybe this is what I'll also say, if you're a skeptic, I was a skeptic, right? So like I heard like life coach, right? I kept hearing life coach.
We've talked about this.
We talked about this, yeah. I was like life coach and I was like, ugh. Like, every time I heard life coach, I was like, oh, like what is this new age fluffy, like, what is this stuff? And like, I don't like, what do I need you to help me with my problems? That's what I have friends for. Like I can figure my life out, like I have very strong judgments against coaching and what coaching was. And I will say that like the kind of coaching that we do, the very Catholic, Catholic centered mindset coaching is not any of that. Like, it's not like find your inner self and, it'll tell you the truth. So what I would also say maybe to some people that, have heard the term life coach in the secular world, like give Catholic coaching a try because it's different. And the Lord is always the change agent underneath it all. It's changed it's been done a lot of shifts in my own life. So what do you have to lose, Yeah.
And don't be like me. Mine was, like you said, I can fix it myself. Like it was pride. I can figure this out. Like, yeah, it's hard, but I can thrive in the hard. I can thrive in the stress, but that's not necessarily healthy.
Yeah. And
just because you can do it doesn't mean that you should.
Yes. Yes. And I remember, I think Lisa said this too, that like you can get there on your own, but a coach is going to help you get there faster. So it's not saying that you can't do it on your own. You absolutely can, but it's probably going to take you longer and it's probably going to be more painful, like, because you're going to be stuck in your own head. So anyway, I love coaching. It's great.
You want to get there faster? Come sign up for Discovery Call.
Yeah.
All right. We'll see ya. Thank you so much for joining us this week on Persistence in Prayer. If you would like to find out more about Catholic coaching, follow along on Instagram at Kylie M. Hein, that's KYLIEMHEIN, and send a DM to book your free discovery call.